Plants vs. Zombies has seen its cast of plants change drastically after 16 years of new games and updates. Some plants have had a massive rise to power, while others have had tragic downfalls. In this series, we go over those specific plants that have had the biggest transformations over the years. Today's plant is none other than Doom-shroom. Doom-shroom had a solid start in the original Plants vs. Zombies, then disappeared for an entire 15 years before having one of the most explosive comebacks of any plant in the history of the franchise. So, how did Doom-shroom go from dead and forgotten to become the powerhouse that it is today? This is the explosive history of Doom-shroom in Plants vs. Zombies. The first traces of Doom-shroom appear in the concept art for the first Plants vs. Zombies. However, it's instead labeled Mind Control Mushroom. This suggests that Doom-shroom's design either inspired or took inspiration from an early design of Hypno-shroom. Here we can see George Fan's prototypes of Hypno-shroom and Doom-shroom. Doom-shroom's sprite is just a recolored version of the Hypno-shroom sprite, just with an added mouth. In May of 2009, Plants vs. Zombies would officially release, featuring the finished Doom-shroom. Doom-shroom was a 125 sunk cost single-use insta-kill plant that exploded in a 7x5 area, the largest area of any single-use insta-kill in the game. However, there was a drawback to this. It would leave behind a crater on the tile it was used on for 3 minutes after its explosion. The crater stopped you from being able to plant anything on that tile for its duration. This sounds annoying in theory, but you would basically always be using Doom-shroom towards the zombie's side of the lawn rather than your own side. This meant that the crater would rarely take up a tile where you would actually need to place a plant, since it would be on the other side of the lawn than your plant setup. While the crater gimmick didn't impact Doom-shroom too much, its daytime sleepiness definitely did. Just like every other mushroom plant in the game, Doom-shroom would only be active at night, requiring a coffee bean to wake up during the day. This was a significant drawback, bringing it down a notch and putting it on par with the other insta-kills, rather than being just completely busted. But it wasn't all doom and gloom. Yeah, see what I did there? This nerf also opened up a little bit of strategy in that you could place Doom-shrooms ahead of time, then use a coffee bean at a strategic timing to blow them up later. In the adventure mode, Doom-shroom was a niche but very powerful pick. It was the last plant unlocked in the night stage, as you received it after beating level 2-8. This meant that the bulk of its usage in a first playthrough would be in the fog stage, where it proved very helpful. This is because it's one of the few plants that can hit balloon zombies in the air. Not even a digging digger zombie could escape its wrath. Literally no zombie in the game could evade its blast. Doom-shroom could tear apart the entire cast of zombies in one shot, except the Gargantua, which would go down in 2 shots. You would once again be able to use Doom-shroom after unlocking Coffee Bean from level 5-3, which opened up Doom-shroom to be used in any level, no matter the weather. In the survival modes, Doom-shroom was also very powerful. Its ability to completely nuke waves in a single explosion made it very valuable in all the survival stages and survival endless due to the high density of zombie waves. In the console and DS exclusive versus mode, Doom-shroom was absolutely overpowered. Any zombie push could easily just be nuked with a single Doom-shroom. On top of this, Coffee Bean was buffed to only cost 25 sun in this mode. So if you chose plants and picked Doom-shroom, it was basically a guaranteed win. Doom-shroom was often banned in matches and tournaments, such as in its PvZ's versus mode tournament, due to it being so unfair. Overall, Doom-shroom had great beginnings. It wasn't the best plant in the game, but it was definitely really strong. Well, except for the versus mode where it actually was the best plant in the game by far. Plants vs. Zombies 2 was soon on the horizon, and it was looking likely that Doom-shroom would nuke its way into the sequel and continue its great form. However, Plants vs. Zombies 2 would mark the beginning of an extremely long and dark period for Doom-shroom. Plants vs. Zombies 2 released in July of 2013, and roughly half of the plants from the first game returned. But Doom-shroom wasn't one of them. In fact, none of the mushroom plants returned because there was no night stage in Plants vs. Zombies 2. It wouldn't actually be until the next year that we saw anything more of Doom-shroom. And surprisingly, it was in a completely different game. Plants vs. Zombies Garden Warfare released in February of 2014, and Doom-shroom missed the cut yet again. However, the very next month, the Garden Variety DLC update would be added and Doom-shroom would finally reappear. However, it wasn't the same Doom-shroom, not even close. Doom-shroom wasn't one of the lucky 4 plants to become a playable shooter character, but instead it returned solely as an NPC spawnable potted plant. In this form, it was no longer single use. Instead of dying after exploding, it would take about 30 seconds to recharge, then would be able to explode again. It would also only explode when zombies came near it, instead of exploding as soon as it was planted. Doom-shroom wasn't the best potted plant in the game, but it definitely wasn't bad either. It could do well against large clusters of zombies when planted near your garden in the garden ops mode. In PvP modes like gardens and graveyards, it could catch players off guard, instantly killing them, mainly when used in night maps. In this game, mushroom spawnables could be used in day or night. The only reason Doom-shroom was better at night was because it could blend in better in the dark, thus catching players by surprise more often. Overall, Doom-shroom had a very minor appearance in this game. It was good, but not outstanding at its job. What Doom-shroom really craved was a proper return to its tower defense roots, where it really shined. And that was looking more likely than ever a few months later, because in June and July of 2014, the Dark Ages Parts 1 and 2 updates would be released in Plants vs Zombies 2. This was the game's dedicated night-based world, and basically all of the plants added as part of the world were mushroom plants from the first game. The world featured the return of Sunshroom, Puffshroom, Fume-shroom, Magnet-shroom, Hypno-shroom, but notably not Doom-shroom. Yet again, it was left abandoned and forgotten. Some other plants were found in the game's code that were at some point considered for the Dark Ages, including Scaredy-shroom, but Doom-shroom wasn't one of them. So it was never even close to making it to the game in either update. As such, the next couple of years would pass without any news for Doom-shroom. 2016 was eventfully uneventful for Doom-shroom. This is because it featured in 2 games, but again, only in very minor roles. Firstly, it returns in its spawnable potted plant form for Garden Warfare 2, where it functioned the same as it did in the first Garden Warfare. It also had a legendary variant called Perfume-shroom, which was just a functionally identical reskin. In fact, I'd say Doom-shroom was better than Perfume-shroom here, despite it being a legendary, solely because Perfume-shroom's vibrant pink colors were far more noticeable to the zombies than Doom-shroom's dark colors, especially in night maps. Later in the year, Doom-shroom would reappear in Plants vs Zombies Heroes. Yet again, it wasn't one of the playable plant heroes, but was instead delegated to being a plant trick. It would destroy every plant and zombie in play with more than 4 strength. The fact that it could destroy your own plants too meant that it wasn't great to use in decks with strategies involving high strength cards. As such, it wasn't a very versatile card and was completely overshadowed by Shamrocket, another Guardian trick that was far more versatile and cheap. Doom-shroom would go on to reprise its role from the Garden Warfare games in the 3rd shooter, Battle for Neighbourville. It functioned just the same as it had for the past 5 years, but received a new vibrant purple aesthetic. Although it looked pretty cool, this was likely a bad thing for the same reasons as Perfume-shroom was inferior to Doom-shroom in Garden Warfare 2. For the spawnable potted Doom-shroom, the more it stands out, the worse it is. A couple of years later, in 2021, Doom-shroom would finally return to Plants vs Zombies 2. However, its return was in a form that nobody was expecting. Doom-shroom was a balloon. I wish I was joking. After 12 long years of waiting, all Doom-shroom got to be in Plants vs Zombies 2 was the plant food ability of another plant, Boom Balloon Flower. When using plant food on Boom Balloon Flower, it releases a massive balloon of Doom-shroom called the Doom Balloon, which explodes, dealing damage to zombies on the entire lawn. It is a good plant food ability, and it was cool to finally see Doom-shroom back, but this was the most insulting way of doing so. Doom-shroom deserved to be more than just a cameo plant food ability for another plant, and players weren't happy about this. A few years would pass with this being Doom-shroom's sole disappointing return to tower defense Plants vs Zombies. Then, something huge happened for the plant. In 2024, Doom-shroom finally made its explosive return to tower defense Plants vs Zombies, after an excruciating 15 years of underwhelming spin-off roles and insulting cameo teasers. To put just how long this absence was into perspective, some of you watching are probably 15 years old. If so, Doom-shroom hadn't had a new mainline Plants vs Zombies appearance for as long as you've been alive. At this point, Doom-shroom was one of only 9 plants yet to be added to the second game from the first, with most of the others being tools like Plantain and Coffee Bean, which wouldn't really work in the second game. So after all these years, how did they decide to implement Doom-shroom? I mean, at this point, Plants vs Zombies 2 was a completely different game to when it launched 11 years prior. There had been such a large amount of power creep with each new plant added over the years that porting over Plants vs Zombies 1 plant as is was no longer even an option. In fact, a few years prior, they even started going back and buffing old Plants vs Zombies 1 plants that were added at launch, including Torchwood and Snowpea. If you want to know more about how those plants have changed, go watch my videos on their histories after you're done with this one. Doom-shroom had to be altered to make it ready and competitive for modern Plants vs Zombies 2, with more of an emphasis on the arena and Penny's Pursuit modes over the adventure mode. And oh boy, altered it was. It now costs 175 Sun and looks a little different, but its looks actually changed because it now has a growth mechanic similar to Sunshrooms. That's right, it's no longer an instant plant. Instead, when you plant Doom-shroom, it won't detonate until a zombie destroys it, and the stage of its growth at the time of being destroyed determines the effect it'll have. At the first stage, if destroyed, Doom-shroom will deal 1100 damage in a 3x3 area. That's a little under the damage required to kill a buckethead. If it isn't destroyed within 8 seconds, it grows to its second stage, which, when destroyed, deals slightly more damage, but more importantly, also spawns a first stage Doom-shroom on a tile around it. That's right, Doom-shroom can now duplicate itself. After 12 seconds in its second stage, it grows to its final stage where it deals 2200 damage in a 5x5 area when destroyed. 2200 damage is about 2/3 of a Gargantua, or just a little under the amount required to kill a brickhead zombie or one of its equivalents. Doom-shroom still leaves craters, but they now only last for 13.5 seconds, which is really not much at all. Its plant food ability makes every Doom-shroom on the lawn grow a stage, then explode. Doom-shroom is somehow even more powerful in this new form, and added 50 extra sun cost does basically nothing to negate this. This is mainly because of its duplicating mechanism. Each Doom-shroom spawned by a second or final stage Doom-shroom explosion can then go on to grow itself, thus spawning another Doom-shroom when destroyed. Then that Doom-shroom can spawn another Doom-shroom and then another and another, and you get what I mean. If you play it right, you can sustain never-ending Doom-shrooms for only 175 Sun, and this is absolutely overpowered. Obviously, the adventure mode wasn't built to handle such power creep, so Doom-shroom can absolutely tear it apart, much like many other modern Plants vs Zombies 2 plants. Doom-shroom's greatness extends into the arena and Penny's Pursuit modes, since its new mechanics are so powerful that it rivals all the other broken seedium plants being released these days, which says a lot for a plant from all the way back in 2009. The only zombies that its final form can't one-shot in the adventure mode are Robocones, Imp Dragons, and Gargantuas. Imp Dragons are actually immune to Doom-shroom, but they're a very rare zombie in the adventure mode. There are only 3 levels in the entire adventure mode where this interaction can even come into play. In the arena, Penny's Pursuit, and timed event modes, other zombies that can survive a max level Doom-shroom, apart from mini-bosses, are all the Brickhead variants, Jurassic Rock Punches, Sunday Editions, Scorpions, and Arena Yetis. This is of course before considering buffs. Also, Imp Dragons are a lot more common in these modes, which can hinder Doom-shroom a little bit. But apart from that, Doom-shroom can effortlessly annihilate the entire cast of zombies, including all of the Z-Corp and Backyard Big Top specials. Add this versatility to the fact that you can get multiple or even infinite Doom-shrooms from just one Doom-shroom, and you have an extremely great plant, or dare I say, an explosively great plant. Doom-shroom's agonizing 15-year wait ended in a satisfyingly great way for the plant, as its return to the second game ended up not just meeting, but exceeding its power in the first game. But Doom-shroom's story isn't over. There's just one more year we have to talk about. In mid-2025, Doom-shroom actually received a buff in Plants vs Zombies Heroes, as it now conjures a mushroom card when played. The janitor updating the game accidentally said that it draws a mushroom card in the description when it actually conjures one. But this isn't actually the main talking point for Doom-shroom in 2025. That's because Doom-shroom's sudden return to form would only continue with the release of Plants vs Zombies Replanted, bringing back every plant from the first game. Although this is a remake of the first game, there were some key differences, mostly bugs, that snuck their way into the launch version. The most game-breaking of which just so happened to revolve around Doom-shroom. In the Versus mode, where Doom-shroom is already completely overpowered as I explained earlier in the video, there was a glitch in Replanted's launch version which somehow made Doom-shroom even more diabolically broken in this mode. This is because Doom-shroom was able to destroy zombie tombstones, unlike the original Versus mode versions. So not only could Doom-shroom completely wipe the entire zombie side, but it could also stop them from building up any brain production too. This was quite frankly mental and was one of the bugs that contributed to the early backlash of the game. As such, it was patched very quickly, while some plants actually got worse in Replanted at launch, including pumpkin and garlic, which were missing their decayed state sprites. Doom-shroom was one of the very few plants which actually benefited from the buggy launch of the game. Doom-shroom's entry into Plants vs Zombies 1 made it an instant fan favorite, but this was followed by 15 years of torment, from spin-off appearance to spin-off appearance, and always being so close, yet so far from returning to mainline Plants vs Zombies. But now, Doom-shroom has suddenly become revitalized and appeared in 2 Plants vs Zombies tower defense games in a matter of 2 years, with it being just as, if not even more powerful than it was back in 2009. At last, Doom-shroom is back and better than ever, a surprisingly happy conclusion to an otherwise disappointing and doubtful history.